This one is heavy.
Yeah.
We're going deep into the case of Mary Bell, 11 years old, convicted of manslaughter.
Just 11.
For the deaths of two young boys back in 1968.
It's a case.
This is a case that stays with you.
It does.
It forces us to think about, what creates such darkness.
Yeah.
The scars of childhood and how our justice system
Yeah.
even begins to handle something like this.
One of the things that strikes me right away is how much Mary's early life
Yeah,
just mirrors the struggles of her community.
right.
Newcastle, specifically the Scotswood area where
Yeah.
she lived, was practically drowning in poverty.
Yeah.
Crime was rampant, support systems were thin on the ground.
It was a tough time.
Very tough. It's hard to separate Mary's individual hardships
Right.
from that larger context.
Her home life wasn't just hard, it was deeply troubled.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about her mother, Betty, involved in sex work,
Right,
alleged mental health issues,
right.
substance abuse. The picture painted is bleak.
And there are even allegations that Betty used Mary for financial gain,
Oh,
subjecting her to abuse from a very young age.
wow.
When you read about the state of their home,
Yeah,
constantly filthy,
Yeah.
it's just a stark image of neglect.
yeah,
And sadly, this wasn't entirely unique to Mary's situation.
right.
Poverty and lack of social support created a breeding ground
Yeah,
for this kind of environment,
right.
making it hard to disentangle Mary's individual circumstances
Right.
from the broader societal issues at play.
It's hard to imagine a child growing up like that
Yeah,
and not being deeply impacted.
right,
Chronic bedwetting, fear, inability to form attachments.
right.
These are classic trauma responses.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder, how could these early experiences have shaped her later action?
Yeah,
I mean, the nature versus nurture debate,
you can't avoid it.
it's unavoidable here.
Really is.
Yeah.
Even beyond the alleged abuse, Mary's childhood was turbulent.
Uh-huh.
She had trouble connecting with other kids, lied frequently, showed aggression,
Right.
had a volatile temper. These were more
Yeah.
than just typical childhood difficulties.
Right. And there are specific incidents that are truly chilling.
Oh, yeah,
One involving a young boy falling from a ledge and getting hurt.
right.
Another where Mary attacked 3 girls in a sand pit, choking them, trying to force sand into their mouths.
These events could be seen as red flags, warning signs that went unaddressed.
Yeah.
This highlights how crucial it is to recognize and address potentially harmful behaviors in children, especially when coupled with a background like Mary's.
Of course.
But back then, was there a system in place to effectively identify and intervene in cases like Mary's?
Right.
It's a question that lingers.
All right. So we've covered Mary's turbulent childhood.
Yes.
Now let's shift our focus to those chilling events of 1968.
Okay.
In May of that year, 4-year-old Martin Brown was found dead
Mm-hmm.
in an abandoned house.
The scene was disturbing. Martin on his back, blood and saliva coming from his head.
Oh.
Initially, his death was ruled an accident.
Really?
The post-mortem couldn't determine a cause.
Wow.
Imagine the fear that gripped the community.
Oh, yeah.
A young boy dead.
Yeah. No clear explanation. And it makes you wonder, were Mary and her friend Norma Bell just trying to blend in?
Right.
Or was something more sinister at play?
Mm-hmm.
The account mentions them participating in protests,
Yeah.
demanding the demolition of abandoned buildings after Martin's death.
Their presence, particularly their reported demeanor,
Uh-huh.
smiling and giggling,
Oh,
adds a layer of unsettling complexity.
yeah.
Did they grasp the gravity of the situation?
Yeah.
What were their motivations?
Hard to say.
It's hard to reconcile their behavior with the tragedy that had occurred.
Barely a few weeks later, 3-year-old Brian Howe disappears.
Right.
Last seen playing with his dog.
His body was discovered in a wasteland near his home. And this time, there were undeniable signs of homicide.
Okay.
Bruises and scratches around his neck pointed towards strangulation.
Oh my gosh.
Scratches on his face, blood dripping from his mouth, cuts on his genitals, thighs, legs.
Ugh.
The level of violence inflicted on such a young child is simply horrific.
It's almost impossible to reconcile the brutality of what was done to Brian
Yeah,
with how Mary and Norma acted afterward.
right.
I mean, this dissonance is precisely what fueled public fascination and horror.
Absolutely.
Once again, they were present during this search, described as singing and dancing and skipping.
It's chilling.
A pattern starts to emerge, one that's impossible to ignore.
Yeah.
But how did the investigation unfold?
Well,
What led the police to focus on Mary and Norma?
after Brian's murder, the police interviewed over 1,200 children.
1,200.
During those interviews, inconsistencies in Mary and Norma's statements began to surface.
Unclear answers, changing stories,
Right.
unsettling laughter during questioning.
Yeah.
All these raised red flags for investigators?
A crucial piece of evidence came from Mary herself.
Oh.
She claimed to have seen an 8-year-old boy playing with Brian on the day he died, even saying the boy hit Brian.
But wasn't that...
But that boy had a solid alibi.
Oh.
He was at the airport with his family.
Oh, wow.
So Mary's detailed description of a pair of broken scissors,
Right?
scissors matching those found near Brian's body,
Oh.
took on a whole new meaning.
That's a huge turning point.
It was combined with Norma revealing that Mary had taken her to see Brian's body.
Wow.
And confessed to killing him by squeezing his neck.
Oh.
The police had enough to make an arrest.
Wow.
Norma even led them to a razor hidden under a concrete block.
Oh my gosh.
A razor confirmed to have been used on Brian.
The arrests were a major breakthrough.
They were.
But the question remained, how could two young girls be capable of such horrific acts?
That question is what makes this case so deeply unsettling.
It really does.
It challenges our assumptions about innocence.
Yeah.
And forces us to consider the factors that contribute to such tragedies.
We're left with this chilling reality. Seemingly ordinary children can commit terrible acts.
It's a tough reality to face.
It is.
It really challenges our assumptions about innocence and forces us to consider the factors that contribute to such tragedies.
We've just begun to scratch the surface of this complex and disturbing case.
Yeah.
Up next, we'll delve into the trial, the verdict, and the difficult questions they raised.
Right.
Stick with us as we continue to unravel the Mary Bell case.
So the trial for the murders of Martin Brown and Brian Howe started in December 1968.
Wow.
It was a media frenzy.
It must have been.
The nation was captivated by this horrific case.
Yeah.
And within that courtroom, you saw this clash of personalities and stories.
Right.
That was almost as gripping as the crimes themselves.
You mentioned contrasting personalities.
Yeah.
The account really highlights the stark differences between Mary and Norma.
Yeah.
During the trial?
Absolutely. Mary, despite her young age, was sharp, articulate.
Really?
She engaged with the questions, even threw in some witty remarks.
Oh, wow.
Norma, on the other hand, seemed overwhelmed by the situation, coming across as much more simple, more childlike.
And that difference extended beyond the girls themselves.
Yeah.
Norma came from a larger family.
Right.
Seemingly more supportive than Mary's.
Yeah.
It feels like that played into public perception as well.
It did. Norma's family elicited more sympathy from the public, while Mary's isolation was palpable.
Yeah.
Norma's reactions, the fear, the tears, were seen as more typical for a child, more innocent.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Mary's lack of visible emotion, her seeming detachment from the horror of what had happened, it fed into this image of her as cold and calculating.
And then there was Mary's mother, Betty.
Right.
She didn't exactly do Mary any favors during the trial.
Betty's behavior was disruptive, to say the least.
Yeah.
Sobbing loudly, storming out of the courtroom, then reappear dramatically.
Goodness.
It's as if she was trying to steal the spotlight,
yeah,
adding yet another layer of dysfunction to an already difficult situation for Mary.
You mentioned the court being a crucible where personal histories, social pressures, and the legal proceedings all collide.
It really is.
This is a prime example.
Yeah.
So how did the prosecution approach the case?
Oh.
What was their strategy to prove Mary's guilt?
Handwriting analysis played a key role.
Okay.
Samples of Mary and Norma's handwriting from their school books were compared to the notes left at the vandalized nursery.
Right.
And the similarities were striking.
And there's that chilling story Mary wrote in one of her school books.
Right.
The one depicting a young boy found dead in an abandoned house.
Yes.
It's hard not to see the parallels to Martin Brown's death.
Written just one day after Martin's body was found.
Really?
It included details that hadn't been made public, like the pill bottle near the body.
Wow. So...
But isn't it possible that Mary was simply copying something he'd read or heard elsewhere?
Right.
How much weight should we put on this story as evidence?
That's a good question.
It raises some very interesting questions about the nature of evidence and influence
Yeah.
in such a case.
But you also mentioned the importance of addressing early warning signs.
Right.
Looking back, it's easy to connect the dots.
Right.
But was there a framework back then to understand these behaviors?
Right.
To differentiate them from typical childhood development and to intervene effectively?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? Back then, the understanding of childhood psychology, especially in the context of potential criminal behavior, was far less developed.
Of course.
It's difficult to say for certain whether effective intervention was possible
Right.
with the knowledge and resources available at the time.
What about Norma?
Yeah.
What was her role in all of this in the prosecution's eyes?
Norma's involvement was much harder to pin down.
Okay.
While initially charged with Brian's murder.
Yeah.
The defense argued she was manipulated by Mary,
Okay.
that she didn't fully understand the consequences of her actions.
So the court seemed to view Norma as a vulnerable child,
Yeah.
easily led, the focus shifting almost entirely onto Mary,
It did.
who is then seen as the mastermind.
Right. Ultimately, the jury acquitted Norma on all charges.
Wow.
Remember, Norma was Mary's friend who was also initially charged,
Right.
but seen as more of a follower than the instigator.
So what was the verdict in Mary's case?
Right.
How did the court reconcile the horrific nature of the crimes with her young age and the possibility of mental disturbance?
It was a complex decision.
It had to have been.
Mary was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
Okay.
This meant the court recognized that she was suffering from a mental abnormality, specifically psychopathic tendencies.
It's psychopathic tendencies in children.
Yeah.
That's a heavy concept.
It is.
What does that actually mean in this context?
It's a good question.
Are we talking about a mini-adult psychopath?
Not exactly.
Okay.
Psychopathic tendencies in children are complex.
Yeah.
It often manifests as a lack of empathy,
Right.
difficulty understanding consequences,
Yeah.
and sometimes a fascination with violence.
Wow.
The challenge, especially back then,
Yeah.
was separating this from normal childhood development.
Right. Right.
The court essentially acknowledged that while she did these terrible things,
Right.
her mental state at the time made her less culpable than a fully functioning adult.
But the judge still labeled her dangerous, a grave danger to other children,
Right.
sentencing her to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure.
Yeah.
An indefinite sentence.
An indefinite sentence. This reflected the complexities on the case.
Yeah.
A child convicted of horrific crimes,
Uh-huh.
but also deemed mentally disturbed and in need of treatment.
Yeah.
It highlights the ethical dilemmas that arise when children commit serious crimes.
Right.
How do we hold them accountable while also recognizing their developmental immaturity
Yeah.
and the potential for rehabilitation?
It's a balancing act with no easy answers.
It really is.
So where did Mary serve her sentence?
Right.
A regular prison wouldn't have been suitable for a child,
No.
especially one with her background and psychological profile.
Exactly. Due to her age and the unique nature of the case,
Right.
Mary couldn't be sent to a traditional prison or a mental hospital.
Yeah.
She was placed in Red Bank's special unit,
Okay.
a reform school originally designed for boys.
Imagine being the only girl in a facility full of boys.
Red Bank, a reform school intended for boys.
It must have been an incredibly isolating and challenging environment for Mary.
The accounts suggest it was a difficult period for her.
Yeah.
She struggled to adapt to confinement,
Right.
and her relationship with her mother continued to be a source of turmoil.
Right.
Betty would visit regularly, but these visits often triggered outbursts from Mary,
Oh, wow.
further complicating an already volatile situation.
This whole situation with Mary's mother selling stories to the tabloids.
Right.
Did the justice system ever intervene?
Yeah.
Was it any attempt to protect Mary from further exploitation?
Sadly, it seems that Mary's notoriety overshadowed concerns for her well-being.
Wow.
There's no indication that any measures were taken to prevent her exploitation by the media or even by her own mother.
It's a stark reminder of how the pursuit of sensationalism can often eclipse the ethical considerations.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to vulnerable individuals like Mary.
Absolutely.
So while Mary was trying to navigate this incredibly complex environment at Red Bank,
Right.
she was also dealing with the added burden of her mother's actions and the constant media scrutiny.
Right.
How long did she remain there?
Yeah.
Was she ever deemed fit to re-enter society?
Mary spent several years at Red Bank. before being transferred to Moore Court Open Prison at the age of 16.
More court, that's,
Open prisons are designed for inmates considered lower risk,
okay.
offering more freedom and a pathway towards reintegration into society.
It's interesting that they chose this approach for Mary.
Yeah.
It suggests they saw some potential for rehabilitation, a glimmer of hope that she could change her life's trajectory.
It speaks to the delicate balance the justice system has to strike
Right.
when dealing with young offenders.
Yeah.
While accountability and public safety are paramount,
Of course.
it also recognizes that young people are still developing
Right.
and might be capable of positive change.
But this is Mary Bell we're talking about.
Right?
Didn't she escape from Moore Court at one point?
Yes. In 1977, at the age of 20, Mary escaped,
Oh, wow.
reportedly to meet a man and lose her virginity.
Oh, my.
This speaks to her impulsivity and
Yeah.
perhaps her ongoing struggle to conform to societal expectations.
Right.
She was found and returned to custody, receiving a relatively light punishment,
Oh, wow.
28 days without privileges.
Escaping to lose your virginity.
Yeah.
I guess some teenage impulses are universal, even for convicted murderers.
Seems so.
It's almost absurd, a bit of dark humor in this incredibly grim story.
Yeah,
But it also highlights the challenges of rehabilitation,
right.
particularly for someone who had experienced such profound trauma and disruption in their life.
Absolutely.
So when was she finally released?
Yeah.
Did she manage to build a new life for herself?
Mary was released from prison in 1980 at the age of 23.
Okay.
And granted anonymity,
No,
she was given a new identity to shield her from public scrutiny
right.
and allow her a fresh start.
Anonymity for someone like Mary Bell, that had to be controversy.
It was,
Yeah.
and remains so to this day.
Yeah.
Those who supported it argued it was essential for her rehabilitation
Right.
and reintegration into society.
Yeah.
They believed she deserved a chance to rebuild her life free from the stigma of her past.
Okay.
Opponents argued the public had a right to know her identity and whereabouts,
Yeah.
citing concerns about public safety
Yeah.
and the need for transparency.
It's the age-old debate.
It is.
Protecting the rights of the offender versus addressing the concerns of the community.
Exactly.
There are no easy answers.
There really aren't.
And it becomes even more complex when you consider that Mary went on to become a mother herself in 1984.
It does.
Did she ever reveal her past to her daughter?
It seems Mary initially kept her past a secret.
Okay.
However, when her daughter was 14, their identities were exposed,
Wow.
thrusting them back into the public eye.
Imagine having your carefully constructed life,
I know.
your attempt at normalcy shattered like that.
Right.
It's a harsh reminder of how the past can resurface in unexpected and often painful ways.
Absolutely.
It also speaks to the enduring fascination with this case.
Yeah,
Its power to both horrify and intrigue, even decades later.
it's true.
And the debate surrounding Mary Bell, is she a product of her environment, a victim of circumstance, or cold-blooded killer, continues.
Exactly. We've delved into her troubled upbringing,
We have.
the gruesome nature of the crimes,
Yeah.
the complexities of the justice system's response, and even her attempts to build a new life.
It's incredible.
But ultimately, the question of who Mary Bell truly is
Right.
and whether true rehabilitation is possible in a case like this remains a haunting enigma.
This deep dive into the Mary Bell case has been challenging, confronting us with the darkest aspects of human nature.
It has.
It's a case that stays with you long after you've learned the details.
It forces us to consider the enduring impact of childhood trauma,
Yeah?
the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator, and the limitations of our understanding of criminal behavior,
Right.
especially in children.
This case serves as a sobering reminder that even in the face of seemingly incomprehensible acts, the search for understanding, for answers, must continue.
I agree.
It leaves us with more questions than answers, and perhaps that's the most unsettling aspect of it all.